Hello and welcome to Radio Free America. Today I would like to talk about Durnil's video, his second video actually, on the Moving to North Korea subreddit. He calls it the worst place on the internet, just got worse.
I'm so excited to return to quite possibly the most controversial community on the internet, and to be honest, it's gotten so much worse. I found this subreddit called r/moving to North Korea about 6 months ago, and it's more than doubled in membership since the last time I took a look. They've also updated some of their rules, making sure everyone knows this sub is not ironic. These people quite literally want to move to the nation of North Korea.
So is the Moving to North Korea subreddit ironic? No. But sort of. They are not fully serious, of course. It's a shitposting subreddit. But the subreddit is full of people that unironically support North Korea, and many of which probably do want to move to North Korea. This is something that just blows the brains of your average Westerner like Drew here. The image of North Korea that is portrayed in the West, especially through Western media and Western social media, is almost entirely fabricated. The perception of North Korea as it is portrayed in the West through Western media, especially through Western social media, is almost entirely a fabrication. There is very little truth to it. This is for many reasons. The main one being that North Korea is a hermit nation. It's a lot more closed off than every other nation on this earth, and therefore you can just say pretty much anything you want about it, and it's very hard to verify whether or not it's actually true. And of course, there are nefarious forces at play that take advantage of this fact, mostly the US government, which, if you're not aware, is still technically at war with North Korea. After the Korean War ended, an armistice was signed, but there was no peace treaty. So technically they're still at war with one another, and the US is still actively spreading propaganda about their enemies in North Korea. One of the ways in which the US spreads propaganda about North Korea is through the National Endowment for Democracy. Even Wikipedia admits that upon its founding, the NED assumed several former activities of the CIA. Political groups, activists, academics, and some governments have accused the NED of being an instrument of US foreign policy helping to foster regime change. Both of the original founders of the NED admitted that it is a CIA cutout. One of them, Carl Gershman, said that the NED was created because it would be terrible for democratic groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. The other founder, Alan Weinstein, said, "A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA." The NED funds different organizations around the world with the express goal of propagandizing about their communist enemies. For instance, Daily NK is one of the more prominent news organizations that spreads a lot of negative propaganda about North Korea, and they are, of course, funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. Daily NK themselves readily admit that they could not exist without this funding. Their press kit says Daily NK relies on life support from the US taxpayer in the form of annual National Endowment for Democracy grants. The US government also spreads a lot of propaganda with Radio Free Asia, which was originally created by the CIA to broadcast anti-communist propaganda. Of course, that's just how they were started, but Radio Free Asia was later preserved by the Clinton administration and repurposed into its modern iteration. The current iteration was established by the U.S. International Broadcasting Act of 1994 with the stated aim of promoting democratic values and human rights. By democracy, they of course mean capitalism, and countering the narratives and monopoly on information distribution of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as providing media reports about the North Korean government. Yes, they propagandize equally about China and North Korea, two of America's biggest communist enemies. Not only is Radio Free Asia American state media, they also use anonymous sources to spread propaganda about their communist enemies. For instance, this story, which you probably heard about: North Korean sentenced to death after students caught watching Squid Game. This is pure propaganda. It, of course, never happened. The only source was Radio Free Asia, and their source was anonymous. Sources in the country told RFA.
These people quite literally want to move to the nation of North Korea. As a communist subreddit, we support the Democratic People's Republic and its people, and it is not ironic or satire, and asking so or insisting it is will get you banned.
I don't even understand what he's laughing at here. This isn't really a joke. Yes, it's okay to support the DPRK and its people, especially its people. The DPRK has been victimized by American imperialism since its inception after World War II. The USA, along with the puppet state that they created in the southern part of the Korean Peninsula after World War II, were the evil ones in the Korean War. They killed 2 million plus people, most of them being civilians, women and children. The US had an embargo against North Korea from about 1950 until the early 2000s. After that, they exchanged it for an international sanctions regime against the DPRK through the UN. These types of broad-reaching sanctions have often been described as a form of collective punishment, which is a war crime. It does not target the regime or the leadership. It specifically targets the Korean people themselves. They are the ones who suffer from the US's sanctions regime.
Fifth rule is literally no cringe. The existence of this place is literal cringe.
Why is it cringe? Drew doesn't elaborate here. Yes, it is a shitposting subreddit. But why do you think it's cringe? Later in this video, Drew agrees with a lot of their points about imperialism from the American Empire. What is cringe about this subreddit? I don't understand.
This has been one of my new favorite discoveries, though. This is one of the most upvoted posts in the entire community. It was posted 10 months ago, and it is aged like absolute milk. Is there something that can age worse than milk? Because that's what I would like to say right now. Let's go through the list, shall we? Doesn't have troops across the globe. Well, that is now officially no longer the case for North Korea. Korean troops have been sent to the front lines to fight against Ukraine recently.
Have they, though, Drew? Who told you that? Because the only source for North Korean troops actually being deployed to Russia is South Korean intelligence, American intelligence, and Ukrainian intelligence. There are no independent sources confirming this. There is no evidence of this. The only entities that have confirmed that North Korean troops are in Russia are the ones that directly benefit from this propaganda being spread. South Korea, because they get to demonize their enemies on the other side of the Korean Peninsula, and the US and Ukraine, because they can use this as justification to send more weaponry to Ukraine to fight against Russia.
Launches drone strikes in foreign countries. I don't know if the Koreans are using drones now on the front lines. It's possible.
It's possible. It's possible. What is this video? How could you not verify basic facts like that before making this video? What do you mean it's possible? You are presenting yourself as the expert on why this subreddit is so absurd. How could you not even know the basic things that you're referring to?
Involve itself in foreign conflicts. We really need this meme to get updated. I'm not even denying the criticisms on the US here. That is totally legitimate, but it's just so funny how much has changed inside of the Hermit Kingdom.
See what I mean? He says he's not denying the criticisms of America here. This is what I don't understand about these types of Western liberals. You agree with them on how America is imperialist. Why do you think that you are right on your opinions on the DPRK and they're wrong? What makes you the expert on it and they aren't?
This is not a new thing, by the way. I wonder if these people are aware the North Koreans helped the communist side during the Vietnam War too, and that occurred over 50 years ago. They've obviously been involved in foreign conflicts.
Yes, of course. Hyperbole is coming into play here. To say that North Korea hasn't been involved in any foreign conflicts, of course, that's false. But you're comparing it to America here. America has only not been at war for 17 years of its 200-plus year existence. America is the most imperialist nation to ever exist, not just post-World War II, to ever exist. This is a report from Brown University that came out about a year ago that suggests that post-9/11 wars have contributed to some 4.5 million deaths. These were wars of imperialism on the part of the US. What has North Korea done that even holds a candle to just this one instance of American imperialism? Hyperbole is allowed, especially in satirical or humorous posts.
Stop! You already have enough wars, but I don't have these wars! China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Now, this subreddit has definitely flourished because they do present legitimate criticism about American foreign policy, but it's just really funny once you know North Korea's foreign policy history as well.
Again, tepid condemnations of US foreign policy and a complete exaggeration about North Korea's foreign policy. Do you have any idea what the US's foreign policy is, Drew? On the Wikipedia page for United States involvement in regime change, Wikipedia has to warn you that this article may be too long to read and navigate comfortably. That is how many instances there are of the United States involving themselves in regime change. Have you seen this list, Drew? Have you seen all of the interventions that the US has partaken in post-World War II? How could you possibly compare North Korea to America?
New public housing in North Korea be like versus new public housing in North Carolina be like. You're gonna hear me say this a lot in this video. I'm all here for the criticism of the US. I love that stuff. I do that stuff myself. But to come at it from a standpoint that North Korea is like heaven on earth. Literally, North Korea.
This is a thing that Western liberals constantly do when they see anyone going against the Western narrative on the DPRK. They use a false dichotomy. They assume that it must either be the dystopic hellscape that Western media presents it to be, or a perfect utopia. They ignore the fact that there is an entire range in between those two polar extremes. Every other country they place somewhere along that range, except for North Korea. Why is that? If somebody says North Korea is not the dystopic hellscape that Western media paints it to be, that doesn't mean they're claiming that it's some kind of a utopia. But yes, North Korea does have free public housing, something that the US doesn't have. Isn't that embarrassing? The US, one of the most prosperous nations on earth with the highest GDP in the world, and they can't even house all of their own people, but North Korea can. The tiny hermit nation that has been victimized by the American empire for 75 years. That's what that meme is about. Note, I am a DPRK supporter. I am a North Korea fan. I would never ever claim that North Korea is some kind of utopic paradise. They're a flawed nation just like every other one. They are nowhere near what Western media paints them to be. Would I live there? Maybe. Maybe for a year or two. Probably not for the rest of my life.
Are you guys just not doing basic research? I don't understand. It's really not that hard.
What basic research should we be doing, Drew? And what basic research have you done? You conveniently leave that out of this video. Did you read some Radio Free Asia articles? Did you read some Daily NK articles? Did you go to some anti-communist subreddit and read some weird propaganda about North Korea? What is your research? For me, personally, I don't use Western media to form my opinion on the enemies of the West. I use scholarship from some of the foremost authorities on Korea and Korean history, like Bruce Cummings with his excellent book Korea's Place in the Sun, A Modern History, or Susie Kim's Everyday Life in the North Korean Revolution, or Stephen Gowans with his book Patriots, Traitors, and Empires, The Story of Korea's Struggle for Freedom. You should probably read some books, Drew. Or how about podcasts? Do you like listening to things, Drew? The Blowback podcast is an excellent resource specifically on the Korean War and how basically everything you've heard about it has been a lie. That's what Season 3 covers. How about documentaries? Do you like documentaries, Drew? Why don't you watch Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang in Seoul? It's a documentary that explores the defector industry and how it churns out lies about North Korea. It features the stories of 2 defectors and a lawyer who works with defectors. Or how about My Brothers and Sisters in the North, to give you an idea of what daily life is actually like in North Korea without the very biased lens of Western reporting from Western journalists.
Them communists executed my grandfather. Meanwhile, their grandfather. Alright, we're talking about Germany and the communist world during World War II. That's a perfectly fair point. How about this meme? Liberal response to fascism versus communist response to fascism. Liberals working with Germany at the time versus communists not working with Germany at the time. Wait a second. Let's take that back for a second. What if I told you maybe they did work together? Imagine if they had something known as a non-aggression pact where both sides planned and executed invading completely neutral nations in Eastern Europe. That's crazy.
See, Drew, here you are showing your ignorance again. A non-aggression pact does not mean you're allied with a country or a nation. It simply means that you both equally agree to not attack each other. A similar pact to what all of the other allies had with Germany at some point, of course. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this, it's not the video for that, but the division of Poland was not, for instance, an imperialist act on the part of the Soviet Union. The Germans were going to take Poland no matter what. The Soviets agreed to go along with it because it would keep the Germans from being directly on their border, because they expected the Germans to attack them at some point, which they of course did. I'm sure you don't know what the Curzon line is, Drew, which is the area that the Soviets reclaimed, which was originally theirs before World War I. You should probably ask your Ukrainian friends if they believe that their city of Lviv should still be under Polish occupation.
It's just kind of funny because the immediate response to fascism was not for the communists to fight them. It actually looked something very similar to this.
The immediate response to fascism was not for the communists to fight them. I wonder why, Drew. Have you ever done any kind of geopolitical analysis in your life? The Soviets were not ready to fight the Nazis yet. They were not equipped enough. They were not trained enough. They agreed to the non-aggression pact specifically to buy themselves time. You should be thanking the Soviets. Without them, you would be speaking German right now.
North Korean leader in 1947, women must have equal rights with men to elect and to be elected. The law of sex equality should be enforced throughout Korea, and women should be guaranteed equal rights with men. Also, don't forget his unmatchable drip. South Korean leader in 2024 seeks to abolish Ministry of Gender Equality. Gender equality hurts family structure and perpetuates reverse discrimination against men. Think structural sexism is a thing of the past? Again, we are not claiming here that South Korea is a perfect place. It certainly is not. But to think the response to that is to move to North Korea. I also love how this meme has to go back to 1947 to think of something good that North Korea's got going on for it.
Drew. You fundamentally misunderstand what this post means. What do you mean you have to go back to 1947 to find this proof? The fact that this was said in 1947 is the point of the post. They're comparing what Kim Il-sung said in 1947 to what the current South Korean president is saying in modern times, in 2024. Do you get that? They are misogynist in 2024 when Kim Il-sung wasn't in 1947. Do you know what was happening in the US in 1947? Women did not have equal rights. For instance, it took until 1963 for the US to pass legislation that would guarantee that women would have equal pay to men. 1963, Drew. It's so interesting to me, Drew. You have an awkward cutout of John Cena with Mao Zedong's head. Do you know what's interesting about Mao Zedong? This is his most famous quote: "Women hold up half the sky." See, these communist leaders have always been on the forefront of women's equality. They have never been misogynist. Unlike the current South Korean president in the year 2024, Drew.
One thing I am willing to admit, though, is those North Korean leaders do always have drip. Not enough drip to make me delulu and glorify their nation, but still a pretty good amount. I'm reading a lot of reports that he's even a little territorial with his fashion senses. Only he can do it.
I mean, thank you, Drew, for proving my point that you are consuming only Western media. Not just Western media, but Western media that is literally funded and produced by the US government. What he's showing here is a Business Insider article, which unfortunately is paywalled, and none of my workarounds seem to be working for it, but the source of it is Radio Free Asia. Of course. Again, Radio Free Asia, started by the CIA during the Cold War to propagandize about America's communist enemies, currently run by US Congress. American state media. This story is not true, Drew. Once again, as I showed before, Radio Free Asia uses anonymous sources, like in this article. Sources in the country told RFA. Who are they, Drew? What are their names? Do they even exist?
Breaking news! American soldier reportedly caught looking at pretty girl whole day. This was posted in response of the North Korean soldier that was apparently looking at some woman on the front lines of Ukraine. Honestly, you gotta admit, he does seem pretty happy though. I guess just let him do his thing.
Once again, Drew, here you are falling for propaganda. This is not a North Korean soldier in Russia. This is a poster of a K-pop idol. This man is South Korean. He is of South Korean heritage, but living in Russia and probably conscripted into the war. Why are you so gullible, Drew?
I feel like the article is talking about that situation just shows the world's curiosity behind people from North Korea. I think we're very interested to learn more, and I think a lot of the world wishes that they could help somehow.
Do you want to know what you and your government could do to help North Korea, Drew? They could stop threatening their mere existence. They could drop the international sanctions regime against them, which, as I said before, is a form of collective punishment, a war crime. What you're referring to is probably the US going in and doing regime change. How well has that worked throughout history, Drew?
There's been at least 25,000 or more people that have successfully defected from that country, but unfortunately every year that goes by, the North Korean government has made it harder and harder for that to happen.
25,000 people have defected from the DPRK. It's actually over 30,000, Drew. Do you even understand this number, though? The vast majority of those people that defected from the DPRK did so in a time of actual hardship. During the arduous march of the mid-90s, a horrible famine that happened for many reasons. One being that the Soviet Union had just been illegally dissolved, which was their biggest supporter and trading partner, and also because they had a few years of very bad weather conditions. People were legitimately starving at that time, Drew. They aren't anymore, despite international sanctions against them. During the arduous march, the authorities in the DPRK could not guarantee that they could actually provide food for the people, so they opened the borders and they let anyone who wanted to leave freely leave. That is where the vast majority of these defectors came from, and it's why all of their stories are of horrific hardships, because it was during an actual famine. Defector numbers aren't declining year over year over year just because of them locking down during COVID, for instance, because it was declining before that. The reason that there are so few defectors now is because things are not what you think they are in the DPRK. You've been lied to, Drew. Even so, 30,000 defectors in the last few decades is nothing. That is a minuscule number. Do you know how many people emigrate away from South Korea every year, Drew? About 500,000. 500,000 people are leaving South Korea every year. Why? Could it perhaps be because South Korea is actually the worst place to live on the Korean peninsula? Look at their suicide rates compared to the rest of the OECD. Do you see how much more prevalent suicide is in South Korea, Drew? South Korea is basically a company town, except it's a whole country. Samsung and a few other mega corporations run the place. People in South Korea have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week just to exist. This is what you don't hear about in Western media.
Rent is due. Time to fork over half your income again. Okay, here you go. Rent? What the frick is rent? Definitely a conversation to be had here about rent, but apparently the supposed free rent in North Korea was not enough to keep so many people from trying to escape that country, right? Just kind of a thought.
So many people. What is your metric for so many people? Like I say, 30,000 people out of a 25 million population, Drew. That is a minuscule amount. A minuscule amount.
We can't stop winning. Fun fact, North Korea doesn't like to be called North Korea. They're just Korea in their eyes. South is basically just the American occupation zone, which funny because in this definition, well, I think the real Korea here probably would be considered Chinese occupation zone.
What? How could they possibly be called the Chinese occupation zone? There are no Chinese troops occupying North Korea. Do you know who is occupying part of the Korean peninsula? The U.S. Empire. Just in Camp Humphreys, which is 60 miles away from the border with North Korea, there are over 40,000 U.S. troops stationed there, Drew. South Korea, unironically, is an American occupation zone. There is no one occupying the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. China helped them out in the Korean War. Do you know what they did after that? They went back to their own country. Do you know who never went back to their own country, Drew? The U.S. They've been occupying South Korea since the Korean War. 75 years. How could you possibly be this ignorant about something that you're making an entire YouTube video on with almost 1.5 million subscribers, Drew? Don't you think that you should have some kind of a desire to spread the truth and not to blatantly lie on your 1 million plus platform?
I gotta admit, I enjoyed this subreddit a little bit more the first time. There's a lot more just like nuanced, funny jokes in there. Now it's just getting scary, especially because like it's simple history. I mean, really not hard to disprove this stuff by just basic knowledge of what actually happened in the Korean Peninsula. Like, wow, scary. And
what an interesting way to end the video. Again, Drew, you have no idea the history of the Korean Peninsula. I'd recommend you read those books I showed, listen to that podcast, watch those documentaries. Don't get your news from Business Insider citing Radio Free Asia. You're not going to learn the truth. Western media has a goal. Their explicit goal is to keep capitalism the dominant system in the world. To do this, they spread propaganda about their communist enemies. To end this video, let me answer the question I alluded to before. Would I move to North Korea? Let me show you something, and you can take a guess for yourself. You tell me if you enjoyed this video, if you're a fellow DPRK supporter such as myself, or even if you're just interested to learn about North Korea outside of the lens of Western media, please subscribe to this channel. Click the bell for notifications, and I'll see you on the next video.